you remember the movie Jerry? It was a Gus Van Sant film with Matt Damon and Casey Affleck just walking around because they got lost in this sort of space. And this idea came to me about a young man whose mother dies and gets told by all the relatives that she's gone to a better place, and then him going out to search for her. And I just started. I originally I was writing this story as a film because I'm in the film industry, and it just never clicked. And eventually, the rights came back to me, and I have been a graphic novel and comic book collector and involved in that industry in various capacities and lover my whole life. And I realized I should just make this a book, which is what every screenwriter thinks when their film doesn't do what they want it to do. I like to think I came at it though with a true love of the format, and what wasn't a part of the story originally, which is now, is the whole comic book aspect of it. And I pulled elements of my grandfather. My grandfather was a man who was the first person close to me in my life who died, and he had Alzheimer's and started forgetting my name and things like that. And I remember how heartbreaking that was for me. And I pulled elements from my uncle, who was the second person I knew who died, who introduced me to comic books when I was a kid, an old first appearance of Doctor Strange comic. And my grandfather and I used to actually pretend to be wrestlers because he was a big wrestling fan. And we pretend we were a tag team. And when he died, I remember that was the first funeral I went to. And I looked in the casket, and it's like he wasn't there. It's like he was somewhere else. And so, and I basically wanted to go find what that was, where that was. Where did he actually go? I know this isn't him. Where is he really? And I grew up Catholic and all that stuff. So, I was given elements of that as well. And this story just came to life. And I saw Shawn's work at a convention, and I was like, oh, there's my artist. And so I courted him for a pretty long time. I like to think I didn't hound him too badly. But I eventually met with him at a cafe, pitched him the idea, and he said he'd do it right there. Like, I expected he'd actually want to read it, because I had a rough script and stuff like that, and I wanted his contribution as well to the story itself. But he said, "Yeah, let's do this. I'm finishing up something else, but once I'm done that, let's do this." And then I think eventually he read it. He's like, "Oh, this is really good." But I'll let Shawn chime in about sort of getting him involved in it.
Yeah,
Shawn, tell us about that process.
Yeah, so I mostly just like to hear an idea and kind of decide whether or not I want to work on something after just kind of like getting the Coles Notes version of it. I actually generally, Duane, I don't read scripts until I'm sitting down and drawing them, which is why I hadn't read it first. Because as an artist, I kind of also like to be surprised when I'm sitting down and drawing. I just find it makes the process a little more enjoyable for me. But when you had pitched the idea, I kind of knew right away that this was something I wanted to work on because I'm such a big fan of emotional stories and emotional comics, especially. Growing up, I mostly read superhero stuff. Yep. And then, as I kind of got older and tastes just kind of changed, it was mostly just like very emotional books. And so when you would pitch me that in the coffee shop, it was just kind of like, this is what I want to do. I think I had just finished working on a book called Samurai Grandpa. I think I had just finished doing all the artwork for that. And in its own right, that's also an emotional book. It's all about family and moving on after losing somebody. It's also about revenge too, but that's it's a little different. But yeah, so I was just off that book, and I knew that I wanted to keep moving in that general direction. So when you pitched Better Place, I was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to jump right into this. This sounds like fun. I mean, it took a little while before I actually jumped into it due to some other comic responsibilities, but yeah, it was awesome. It's very cool.
And interesting, same background. Like I grew up a superhero comic reader, and I remember vehemently thinking, I am always going to be a superhero comic guy. I don't, these other things shouldn't be comics. And oddly, it was top shelf books that turned me. It was Essex County. It was Super Spy. It was Nate Powell's Swallow Me Whole. That is actually what introduced me to the power of emotional storytelling through graphic novels. I wasn't a mouse reader, I didn't read all those books. It was those top shelf books that introduced that aspect to me. And I've gone that way with even just not only the stories I tell, but the stories that I enjoy are all over there now. I don't read superhero comics anymore. Like it is only, but I exclusively almost read graphic novels, and they are generally these emotionally impactful, often very personal stories that I'm drawn to now.
And to me, this book really feels like a synthesis of all of those influences. It's precisely about that journey from childhood into maturity, sort of crossing a sort of threshold, reaching a new sort of adult understanding of the world, and also sort of a journey from superhero comics into something else, into the genre that this book is.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, I don't, with other writers, I find I don't realize what I'm writing about until I start writing it. And I just had this story, and it was only after that I was like, oh, this is my relationship with my grandfather. This is with my relationship with my mother, who was a single mother trying to raise a child as a banker and being too busy to really be involved in my life. And even it's interesting with the guest pages from this book, every one of them are by artists who wrote stories about a young person coming of age in Swallow Me Whole in Essex County, even Tyler Boss with 4 kids walking to a bank, with these children protagonists in these adult settings and with adult themes, which I only actually just noticed today as in the drive in. I was like, oh wait, that's interesting that all the sort of contributing artists have done similar books, and those are the books that inspired this.
So we are a little bit new to this platform, but it looks like we have a couple folks joining us who I believe are Texas librarians. If you'd like to type up any questions that you have, feel free to post them into the chat here. You could even turn on your voice and ask a question by audio if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Of Duane and Shawn. We know that the book is not published yet, so you have not had a chance to hold it in your hands, but we're glad that you're here. And if anybody else is watching in the booth, hello, and thanks for joining us. I'd love to, I guess, get maybe a brief plot summary from Duane about what happens in the book, and for those folks watching can sort of wrap their heads around what to expect.
Yeah, it's funny, as a guy who's produced films, I should be better at this, and I'm often really good at it with other people's things. But to me, it's a story about a young boy whose best friend is his grandfather, and when he finds out his grandfather has gone to a better place, he dons the costume of the heroes that he and his grandfather used to play as together, and goes off in search of this better place so that he can be with his grandfather again. That's the gist. and adventures ensue, and yeah, I'm usually really good about boiling things down, but this being my first book, I pulled in so many different aspects to it that are personal and that are, to me, part of the story, that this is one of those times where I find it hard not to go, oh, but it's also this. Oh, but it's also this. Oh, and it's a little piece of this. Because as you said, it's also sort of the coming of age of hero into transferring from hero stories into adult stories, and also retaining that childhood and imagination even as we come of age, that we should never let go of that. And to me, that's what a better place is. I always thought as I was writing this that the key line to me, even though it's not in the book, but a better place is what you make it. And that to me is what this is. It's about discovering what that better place is inside of not only Dylan, the lead character, but for the journey for the mother as well, and how she can help make this a better place for her son, which is something I think my mother always wanted to do and tried to do, but wasn't always successful at it.
Shawn, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the different characters in this story and your designs behind them. Do you have a particular favorite character to draw? How much of a collaboration did you and Duane have in terms of shaping the look of these characters?
Yeah, well, Duane was incredibly generous with what he allowed me to do with the characters. It mostly just started off with some very quick sketches based on actually the grandfather in the story. I based him strongly off of my own grandfather, who had actually passed away about a year before starting Better Place. So I got to draw a lot of influence from my own life into these characters, including Dylan and his mother, who are also obviously big parts of the story. And I was actually reading a lot of Akira Toriyama's work, who is famous for Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. And I ended up taking a lot of influence from his character design to actually work on some of these characters, which was a little funny because his designs are very fantastical and fantasy based, but this is a very down-to-earth and honest story set in our world. So it was kind of interesting to take some influence from, this other genre of comics and try and inject it into what we were doing with Better Place. But the process was actually incredibly straightforward, which was it was a nice change from some of the books that I've done before. It seemed very simple, which I love. Like, it doesn't need to be complicated. It's honestly sometimes the easiest process is the best one, and I found that with Duane a Better Place.
I think, from what I remember, I basically gave Shawn ages, and Shawn had done all these sketches, and I think the only note I had was for Dylan that he was blonde, like, because he had dark hair originally, and I thought, blonde, maybe that'll be even help with the inking.
It did, yeah.
But that was really the only note I remember having, was because I just saw him as this, because I was a blonde, I was a little toe-headed blonde kid back when I had hair. And that's the only note I remember having. And I just remember part of what I loved about Shawn's work, because he talks about this sort of the Japanese influence, but still how much emotion was invoked even in these little head sketches he was sending me, and how much could be conveyed in the joy in the eyes and the sadness of a downturned mouth, and just that there was that cartoon quality with just still so much emotion packed into it. And this being my first go around, every page you get back is just an incredible, exciting time just to see these characters come to life in a way that does, like sort of Shawn said, that seems so natural. Like, I rarely had much to say when it came to some of that stuff.
Duane, could you maybe name a specific page that came back and made you especially happy or proud?
There's a page that really sticks out to me, and it is the page with and it's funny because I had a note for Shawn, but it was a camera angle note, and it's the page where Eileen is on the kitchen floor hugging her own knees by herself, and how much sadness that invoked, how much pain that invoked. And that to me was, to use a funny, it was, this isn't a funny book, to sort of put that as a term used for comic books or graphic novels. Like, no, this is this is what I wanted. This is the heart. This is the gut wrench of emotion and of going through grieving. That I just that page sticks in my head the most. The most fun page though is
I think I can actually show
yeah,
the audience here.
yeah, it's
I can get this to work. Let's see. Is that the one you're referring to here?
yes. And originally, and it was equally gorgeous, but Shawn had the camera down at her level, and he talked about how wanting to be on her level, and the only note I said was, no, I want her to be alone. I don't want us to be up down there with her. I want to be looking down on her to see how alone she is. And look at that image. I mean, it's just so stark, and the shadow coming from the kitchen light overhead underneath the cupboards. It's heart-wrenching to me, and you know, and we don't see her face even, and we just know the pain. And yeah, getting that page back was like, oh yeah, this is real.
Well, that reminds me of sort of an interesting issue with this book, which is that it is about childhood, and it's largely from Dylan's perspective as a child.
Mhm.
And so in general, I think there's a rule of thumb that you want to see everything through his eyes at
Mhm.
his eye line, you know.
Mhm.
So this sort of breaks that for a moment. And I think it's a great illustration of the way that this book dances in and out of his perspective a little bit. It is
Mhm.
primarily Dylan's story, and it's primarily from his level,
Yeah.
but periodically there are these moments where we get a little bit of glimpse of the psychology of the older characters, not
Mhm.
too heavily because he's still the focus,
Yes.
but you know, it has sympathy for every character. The book has sympathy for every character in this story, I think. And Duane and Shawn, you both, I think, contribute a lot to that feeling. Shawn, did
Thanks.
you want to name another scene that you were especially happy to draw?
Yeah, this one, I'm not sure if it's. I won't get too into detail just because spoilers. It is at the end of the book, but I'll say that it involves a rooftop, and
Oh God, I love it.
it's a splash page that involves a rooftop.
Well, I
That
think we can trust the librarians of Texas not to.
sure. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one there. That's it's funny that we both chose splash pages, which obviously, you know, seem to have, you know, the most emotional weight
Mm.
associated with them. This one, I distinctly remember the feeling sitting there at my drawing table working on this, and uh, I seem to really just be a. I don't know if this is an artist thing, but I'm a stickler for everything that I do, and I maybe judge it more harshly than I should, and that sometimes holds me back. And I remember after finishing this piece, sitting back, looking at it, and thinking, "All right, this will do. I think this works. I think I got it." And I still think that looking at this piece, and I'm just happy with the way it turned out. And yeah,
I also love, I mean, it's interesting that what I picked and what you picked, and she's essentially in the same position, but in this one,
yes,
she's holding her child.
exactly, yes.
I actually, I think that's, you know, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, it was definitely a throwback to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you see her uh, vulnerable and alone early on in the book, and this kind of ties back to that, showing that she may still be vulnerable, but at least she's not alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's really beautiful as a sort of before and after.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe let's follow Dylan on his adventures a little bit. Um, I love how much you guys are identifying with the parent character in this case. But let's be sure to, well, maybe we can do the opening scene and talk about Dylan and his grandfather.
I used to do this. I used to ride grocery store carts down mall parking lot parkades, and and pretend that I was, you know, on a spaceship. This is literally, I used to do this, and I'm someone who I think did this for what most people would think were too long. Like I was doing this sort of thing still in middle school, and my middle school was a school that was grade 7 to 11. So there were high school level kids, and I was still dressing up and playing with my thumb wrestlers at lunch and having like full on scenes played out in a cafeteria table alone, shockingly. And so that's what this is. And I felt the pressure of growing up. I felt the pressure of letting that go and letting the imagination having to go. And that was so that's what Dylan is. Dylan is someone who is holding on to this as long as possible and gets pure joy out of it. I mean, I was an only child growing up. And so that's where I got my interaction, was with myself and with pretending to be certain things. I remember I used to pretend I was the Flash. So I would set up and with my shoes in it, and when I get new shoes and I draw lightning on them, and I would see a car coming, and I would time cars and how fast I could beat the car depending on how close I could let the car come to me. And I thought for sure I was the Flash. Like I was like, oh my God, I have powers. Like, and I thought the same thing. I used to pretend I was Aquaman too, in any sort of water setting. And I did these things by myself. That isn't as, compelling in a story. So I introduced the grandfather into it. Because what my grandfather did was pretend to be my tag team partner when we were the champions of the world, and we would, he would throw me onto like pillows, and I would elbow drop them, or throw Tito Santana flying forearm at them, and so we did do that. We made costumes together, and we had a finishing move and all that stuff, and so yeah, I mean, all I can say is Dylan is me, just with a different thing. His is the sort of space thing. And I was always obsessed with space, and my daughter, who's 3 now, is as well. And that's why I interject that aspect into this. Yeah, I loved pretending to be a hero. And I was always, some kids love to pretend to be the villain or Darth Vader and all that, but I always wanted to be the hero.
Shawn, maybe talk to us a little bit about the visual style of the 2 different worlds that this book takes place in, and how you arrange to visually create those distinctions.
Well, I always, whenever I'm working with color, I generally tend to steer towards watercolor paints. So I knew that if we had color sections in the book, that they would definitely be painted in somewhat of a whimsical, almost childlike, in a way, style, really, where it's a little bit messy and not exactly controlled the way a traditional painter might. But I also knew that it would be fun and it would set the mood for the world that Dylan lives in when he's, in his comic books, or thinking about, his grandfather playing make-believe. So, and the style really isn't, to be honest, all that different from the sections of the book that exist within reality, that are very, rooted and down to earth. I had a ton of fun designing the superhero outfits with Duane. That was a blast to figure those out, because they were based off of, as Duane mentioned, kind of old, not just superheroes, but almost like the old cosmic heroes. Like, so we really got to, have a bit of fun with that. But yeah, this is the first book that I've drawn in black and white that has color sections in it. It's usually one or the other. So figuring out where those sections would be, I think we did have a bit of back and forth about that, kind of deciding what panels would and wouldn't be in color. And some of them, I think, originally started off in black and white, and then we said, oh, you know what? Let's take this section and we'll turn it into Dylan's fantasy, something that
the golf cart escape turned into that.
Yes,
the golf cart escape was originally all reality, and realizing like, oh, this is sort of a good opportunity for this, and it's because he ends up leaving this sort of fake better place. It's probably a good kind of last place to see that, because it's sort of the midpoint of the story, and everything becomes a little more real and dark, going towards the end. Not dark, but more reality based. And he doesn't have the opportunity to imagine the same amount. And so I thought it was a good opportunity to throw in one more of those scenes, in the golf cart, trying to escape the aliens, the bad aliens.
Yeah, those scenes were a blast to draw, just because of the cartooning that was kind of, I guess, allowed, not actually, but when you're working with fantastical sections, you kind of want to cartoon things a little bit more. I like that rocket ship, the bend that it has in it.
Yeah.
You really get to just have a bit more fun and do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do, drawing the sections that take place in reality. And honestly, drawing anything in space, it's just fun. It's honestly, as an artist, it's just a ton of fun, getting to draw, spaceships and just outer space in general, stars everywhere. Just a blast.
Lloyd is another, really, I love that character. I love the character of Lloyd.
He was a lot of fun.
Let's get Lloyd's big reveal here at the nursing home.
Yeah.
So this is one of the sort of side characters.
We lost Lee. Did we lose Lee?
Duane, do you want to talk about the impetus behind him?
I lost you a bit there. So, but
sorry.
yeah, I can just sort of talk in general. This was another sort of pull from actually my friend's grandfather, my best friend's grandfather, actually, who my best friend, his name is Shane, and his grandfather, whenever I'd come over for lunch or dinner, he'd call Shane Paul. And so it was kind of pulled from that, and that how a child deals with a person that they love not being able to recognize them anymore, and all that is heartbreaking. At the same time, and this is part where my grandfather, even though he was deteriorating in that sense, he still had that light in his eye, and still wanted to go on these adventures. And he really started to fall hard into his Alzheimer's when my grandmother died. And so that's the idea of Lloyd. And he kept asking where she was. And so that's the idea of where Lloyd was, and Gracie, and mentioning, oh, I know where she is. She's in the better place too. We should go see her. This would be great. Because if I had the wherewithal at that time with my grandfather, he would have absolutely wanted to leave the house and like, if we know where she is, let's go get her. And so the idea that an older person can also have that sense of imagination, even if it comes from that sort of thing, and retain that, inspired the Lloyd character for me. And just in this person who really wants to help Dylan find his grandfather, because all he wants is to be able to find his wife, and believes that they are probably in the same place because that's what he was told as well.
Yeah, there is something, and I apologize if my data connection is problematic here for the moment. There is something really beautiful about the ways that young people and old people can connect, because they're sort of on opposites of this sober, middle-aged life.
Yeah.
They're maybe a little bit closer to the imagination, or they don't have the same responsibilities that a working middle-aged person has. And you see it all the time with like grandparents and their grandkids, and like, I get to spoil you because I'm not responsible for taking care of you on a day-to-day basis.
And also I think that from what
so
I've
visiting a grandparent can really
they tend to, the ones I know anyway, tend to be more carefree, because they don't have these responsibilities, so they just have a more general sense of being carefree and can more easily go along with, yeah, let's do that, sure. And they've lived this long life and are, you know, alive, and so they don't mine anyway, the grandparents in my daughter's life don't have the same sense of concern for my daughter getting hurt that I do. I tend to be overprotective, where they're like, oh, it's fine, they're fine, let her jump off that thing, and they're actually more encouraging of that side of my daughter than I am, and that's what I'm trying to get better at as well. And yeah, it's incredible to watch with my own daughter, and seeing her come home with her own stories of things that didn't happen. But you know, she has these stories in her head that no, they happen this way, and this was amazing. And lately she's been she doesn't want to go to space. She wanted to go to space for a long time, but then she watched something that about black holes, and now she does not want to go to space anymore. And then there was a recent time where she says, so the black hole came into my room. I was like, no, it didn't. But you know, it's I understand. You don't have to go to space. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know what, it's like fantastical reasons like that is why I've always said, you know, if I'm writing a story or drawing a story, I would prefer that it's either about the youthful or the elderly. There's so much, you know, fantastical things that you can do with, you know, with those ages, I think. And it just, as a cartoonist, it makes for an amazing, you know, like a mental exercise, figuring out how, because I'm not a child, I was, but I'm also not elderly. So trying to move into either of those mindsets, it's just a very interesting exercise as somebody writing a story or drawing one.
It reminded me of this scene here of the police station where Grandpa is like, yeah, we were trying to find new galaxies and alien intelligences. It is right. And it's kind of left unclear to the reader how much Grandpa is really buying into this, and how much he's just like indulging Dylan's imagination. And there's this sort of vague hint that he's not 100% together the way that he used to be, and so maybe he is getting a little bit confused, or maybe he's just being very indulgent in that way the grandparents can, like you were saying. Yeah,
because you know, the older people in my life are basically like, well, you know, what are you gonna do to me? Like I am more interested in pleasing my grandchild and participating in this adventure than I am concerned of what'll happen to me from the mall cops. You know, like there's a bit of a, that's what I meant by the sort of the carefreeness that they sort of rediscover, that I've found that people can rediscover in their older age. They can just sort of go back to that's fine. And then the mom comes to stop it all.
Right. Yeah, so throughout this book, the young people and old people are these sort of forces of creativity and chaos. And the middle-aged adults are the forces of like conservative, no.
Exactly.
Yeah. Shawn, what were you going to say? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, actually, I was just going to say that. I love how that all of the middle-aged adults are almost the antagonists of the story, discouraging the creativity and trying to ground everybody. Even the scene in the Better Place home, the home that Lloyd's in, where I can't remember if I guess they're the people that work there. Barge into his room and they're like, hey, like you know, they almost it was actually a very sad scene for me to draw, just because, you know, they're doing the same thing to him that adults have done to Dylan as well.
Well, and it's something I wanted to do too, is that what I wanted, sort of what Lee mentioned with the ages, what I wanted were the middle-aged people to, what their scenes were always trying to bring everything to reality, to the hard truth of what real life is. And whereas the older and the younger were still living in that hopeful, imaginative world where anything is possible. and the adults were constantly trying to drag that down back to reality. No, this is how things are. This is how, with those two home workers, long-term care home workers, basically trying to give Lloyd the drugs that sedate him, that are constantly, that the middle age is about maintaining this thing, this order within this reality, and that's what they're constantly pushing on, and it's what eventually the mother has to shed in order to have a true beautiful relationship with her son.
Yeah, that's interesting, because on some level she does, her journey that she goes on as the mom. For those of you just joining us, we're here with Duane Murray and Shawn Daley, authors of the upcoming book, graphic novel Better Place. And we're talking about the different ages of characters in the story. It fundamentally centers on this young boy, Dylan, trying to process or wrap his head around the idea that his grandfather is gone and not coming back. But at the end of the story, we have the mother having come to terms with the fact that her son does enjoy this level of fantasy, and that it's something that she's not rewarded or participated in, but that maybe it is something that they can do together. And it sort of brings this hint of color back into the universe, this hint of fantasy. And yet at the same time, part of what Dylan has to go through in the book is to join the adult world a little bit. And that is something that he has incorrect and needs to get a more correct understanding of reality. It's not pleasant, and we see how unpleasant it is for him.
Yeah, and that in my mind anyway, it's important to have both, and that to me is what this is about: is his mother and him sort of meeting in the middle, and saying, and it's also why it's very subtle, but I have Dylan during his last speech to his grandfather into the little utility knife. While he's doing that speech, he's in his bed and he's reading Ogres, which is one of Shawn's other books, and that is not a superhero kids book. That even like now he's starting to read different types of books, but that it doesn't mean you have to shed that completely. Like that, it's always important to keep an element of adventure and imagination in your life. If you want to live a joyful life. So yeah, it's about meeting in the middle, and this little monologue into the knife sort of wraps it all up.
Do you guys want to talk for a minute about the guest artists and the process of pulling them in? And Shawn, I don't know if you were involved in, you designed these characters. Did you then sort of share a model sheet, or how did you get them to do the characters?
Right. Well, Duane actually, I think because Duane, you might be able to comment on this more, since you had the idea for these characters a little while before we started on the book. Did you commission any of these pieces earlier?
Yeah, this one that we're seeing, Matt Kintz, was drawn before. That's the only one still in the book. Jeff Lemire had done a piece, but it was really rough, and he ended up redoing it. I even asked him, because he's a busy guy, if I said, "Can I use the piece you did for me?" And he said, "No, I want to redo it." Like now that it's going to be in a book, I'd like to redo it. Yeah, which I just love that piece. So these, as I mentioned, these particularly Nate Powell, Jeff Lemire, and Matt Kint were three graphic novelists, cartoonists who inspired me to do this book. I had the story before and my interactions with them, but they inspired me to make this book. And I just loved the idea of having the people who inspired me and brought joy to my life through storytelling draw pieces that Dylan was looking at and would be influenced and inspired by. And so they over the years they became friends, and I just asked them, and yeah, I'd give them a little bit of explanation, and for some of the later people that came on, I sent them some of Shawn's panels and drawings, and but I still wanted them to do their own take. And this last piece here, the Tyler Boss piece, I also I'm glad we ended up doing, because Tyler Boss is kind of the new guy on the block in terms of cartooning, independent and personal stories. And I love that this sort of last book Dylan receives, and it's a modern version of his hero, is being drawn by the new young guy on the block, Tyler Boss. And yeah, I just really love that piece. So I reached out to each of them. They all were on board, and all delivered just beautiful pieces to me. And every time I get one, I'd send it to Shawn, and Shawn would just be like, "Oh man, it's so wild to see these great cartoonists contribute to this book." I'm so happy for that aspect of it, and I also just I love how much it all complements Shawn's work. I think it's I'm so excited about this book for all the different artists that contributed and how great they are. And they're just also lovely people. Like I just really I think they're all great people too.
To me, it sort of taps into something that I remember it being a disorienting experience as a kid, as a reader of superhero comic books, that when you're used to the characters looking a certain way, and then you stumble across a comic book from a different era or by a very different artist, and it's kind of cool, but it's also kind of alienating because it's unfamiliar and it doesn't necessarily match your memory. And that's one of the things that I think plays into the moment when Dylan gets this comic book from the woman at the amusement park. It's he's been reading his grandfather's copies
Exactly.
of these characters, which date back, many decades.
Yeah.
And so in his head, but he has no context for how old these comic books are,
Yeah.
and that's the way that they look. And these are the
Yeah.
stories. I have all of them, I've got all
Yeah.
or whatever. But then to discover later that like actually there's hundreds of issues and they've been drawn by all these different people, and sometimes they were really grim and sometimes
Yeah.
they were very lighthearted. And
well, and it's funny because it points to the age. So I was born in 73, so I was 13 when The Dark Knight Returns came out. And so this is like, and that was like, whoa, what? Because my Batman was Jim Aparo, baby blue cape and cowl. It was the Adam West TV show. And then all of a sudden that book drops and it's like, what is this? And you're right, it brought up so many emotions because it was so different from what I was reading, but I was also really drawn to it. I was kind of, I was becoming a teenager, but I was drawn to the sort of grim, realistic type storytelling that Frank Miller was doing at the time. But it was also kind of off-putting, especially remember that number 2 cover, where he just filled the whole cover. And it was just the big gruesome Batman, and he looked all distorted, and I just remember that really messing me up.
and Shawn, did you go through a similar experience? Oh, sorry.
No, yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Shawn.
Yeah, I actually didn't. When I was reading superhero comics back in the day, it was very, it wasn't often, just because circumstances here in Canada, they were actually a little bit more expensive, so I couldn't always afford to read comics as much as I wanted to. And it wasn't until my early 20s that I started heavily reading comics and really falling in love with them. But I had ended up starting with not superhero comics. I think the first graphic novel I sat down with and read was Louis Riel.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So, and then that kickstarted, my collection that had nothing to do with superheroes. So when I kind of had like a reverse timeline where I switched to superhero comics from like emotional indie graphic novels for a little while. So I never really had that that experience of looking at a character and saying, hey, this isn't how I remember them, just because I didn't remember them because I never ended up really reading them too often. So I actually never had that, which seems weird looking back at it. But yeah, I don't know, it's never really affected me that much thinking back at it.
I just wanted to show off the climax at the amusement park because I think it's a really fascinating bit of work. If you guys want to, I mean, to me, this is maybe where it becomes the most sustained action scene.
Right.
Shawn maybe playing more to some of the background of work that you've done with more action-oriented comics. And it breaks up a lot of the talking heads that have existed throughout the book, and the dialogue drops away, and it really does what a climax should do. You know, he's been taken to this place beyond anything he's ever experienced before. And it's all visual storytelling for these couple of pages.
Yeah, actually, this is one of my favorite sequences because Dylan is literally and figuratively on an emotional roller coaster. Right? It was a blast to figure out how to use movement to get across how just utterly terrified he is, and to really play around with the idea of just space. And I had never drawn a roller coaster before, so that was also that was also a good time figuring that out.
Well, and this is one, like, when I was writing this as a script, in some pages I get very detailed. In most pages I basically just do panel breakdown estimates, and then Shawn would do it, and I might have a note here and there. But I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted it to look. And I remember this sequence. I mean, in a way, I guess I left Shawn hanging because I basically said, I don't know, he's on a roller. Like, this is the sequence I'm most. This is Shawn. This is all Shawn. Like, I basically, he's on this roller coaster. He thinks he's going to Mars. He's almost slipping out. He's facing death. Go. I had no idea of page count. I had no idea of panel breakdown or how many panel. Like, I just was like, go. And I love it. I absolutely love it. Those are the most fun. You know, when there's two different feelings. There's one where you have a thing in your mind, and then the artist delivers it, and it's exactly how you saw it or slightly better. And then there are times where you have no real idea, and the artist does their thing, and it comes back, and you're like, this is better than anything I could have thought of. Thank you. You know, it's I love it. I absolutely love it.
That's cool. Actually, the him slipping out of the roller coaster there is definitely based on reality. I was able to draw that from my own childhood memories of being on roller coasters.
I had the same thing.
Yeah.
And it was because I snuck on. Like, I didn't get dressed in a mascot costume and sneak on, but I went sort of on my tippy toes and did that whole thing, and I didn't arm slip out, but I remember being in the ride and thinking, oh, that's why those height things are there. It's not to just keep us, you know, to be mean adults. It's safety, because I was not comfortable. I was there was a lot more movement in it than I was comfortable with. It's so nuts, because you never told me that. It's so nuts that you had that same experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that one was drawn from reality for sure.
I love the optical illusion effects here when he is, you know, blacking out or whatever from the hyper G-force.
I know. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Very 2000.
Yeah, that was fun. That
2001.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was just experimenting with some digital techniques that I had seen here and there, actually, in a lot of Japanese books that I kind of wanted to, you know, take a stab at, see, you know, try to figure them out.
Awesome. Well, I have one other thing I wanted to pull up, which is to talk about the cover, which I think is so excellent.
Oh, it's so good.
Let me see if I got it in a format that I can share. And then we can wrap up, because I know, Duane, you've got to get moving.
Yeah.
So let me share this real quick. There we go. I think you guys had delivered us a version of this or an early draft. But we ended up tweaking it some. I love the title treatment. I don't know whose idea. Was that yours, Sean?
That
No,
was
actually, that was, I guess,
you
the,
guys. That was
yeah.
yeah, someone over there.
I wish I had come.
That would have been.
Lovely.
Yeah, I love it. And
That would have.
it shows the power. I made a post on Twitter about the importance of artists in projects, because I did a before and after of, I sent Shawn basically a stick figure like a stick figure thing with a wagon and a guy and this thing, and then Shawn comes back with this. I'm like, oh yeah, that's better.
This one went through a good number of different iterations where we
Right.
tried different things, almost making the front cover look like a comic in a way, where instead of all of these cartooned, colorful images kind of blending in with one another, they were each drawn in their own separate panels, blocked off.
Right. Yeah.
The cover. Yeah, there was like a whole bunch of different ways that we had tried this at first before settling on this, which that's part of the process. That's actually a lot of the fun comes from that.
Yeah, it's I just love it. I just love this cover so much.
I mean, it really focuses on Dylan, and the more you stare at it, the more you see like he's exchanging a sort of gaze with the grandfather and with all these sort of fantasy visions that they're having. And he does sort of literally have his head in the clouds a little bit, but I mean, the fantasy world that he's living in is more real than the real world.
Yeah. And I love that the grandfather is actually like looking down on him, you know, from what we are told as Catholics anyway, that where a better place would be if it existed in a physical realm. You know, it's yeah, I think it's just, there's so many levels to it. I love it.
Terrific. Well, folks, A Better Place will be in stores in August. Thanks so much for joining us. I believe that there is a PDF galley available to librarians in Edelweiss and NetGalley. If not, if you have trouble finding it, you can certainly contact us at IDW and we can hook you up. Really wonderful book. Duane and Shawn, hats off to you guys, and we can't wait to get in people's hands. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank
we
you.
Can't wait either. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, very appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take it easy, gentlemen.
All right.
Folks, thanks for joining us in the booth. We'll stick around and answer your questions in the chat.